Bugville. My name's Matt.
I'm Adam.
And we talked to you yesterday about paleontology, and we asked Miss Bug to send us any questions that you had that followed up on our discussion that we had. So we'd like to answer some of your questions.
Let's answer some of those.
So the first one that we have is from Christian, which is, how do you know what dinosaurs are boys or girls?
You see, that's a question scientists have had for a really long time, and based on just the skeleton of dinosaurs, there usually isn't a way to tell. There aren't real obvious features in the skeleton of dinosaurs, at least not ones we know yet, that can tell you if it's a boy or if it's a girl. But there's some new evidence that suggests that we can tell about one kind of girl dinosaur, a girl dinosaur that's about to lay her eggs. So scientists have recently started, instead of just looking at the outside of bones, cutting them open, because we can tell a lot about how an animal grows up based on how its bones are put together. And sometimes girl birds have a special layer of bone inside of their bones that you can only see when you cut them open. And that layer of tissue that's inside is very useful in getting the material ready to lay an egg. And when some paleontologists cut open certain dinosaur bones, we see that same tissue. So that tells us that almost certainly we are dealing with a girl dinosaur that's about to lay her eggs. So that's the one case where we can really tell for certain whether a dinosaur is a boy or a girl.
But as we know from studying modern birds and modern crocodiles and alligators, every girl reptile isn't about to lay eggs all the time. So in order to find out if a fossil dinosaur is a boy or a girl, you have to catch it right when she's about to lay eggs. Like, she has to have died and become a fossil as she was getting ready to lay eggs. Otherwise, it's really hard to tell. So for our second question.
Yes?
The big flat head of the crocodile, which we showed you yesterday, which was Majungasuchus.
Gasuchus, yep.
Was it bigger than the head of T-Rex?
No!
T-Rex had a giant head.
And Majungasuchus had a giant head too. It's like way bigger than our heads. But Tyrannosaurus Rex is really an animal that's just absolutely enormous. Matt, go stand back there. And then, yeah, there you go. That's about how big Tyrannosaurus Rex's head
It's like
are.
my wingspan.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. Now, there were some crocodile-like animals that did have bigger heads than Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yep, they had heads that were even longer than Matt's arms were back there. But we didn't have any of those skulls to show you, and honestly, those would be really hard to carry around. So.
It would be hard to move those. So that's a reason to go to a museum where they have them on display.
Yep.
How do dinosaurs communicate? So there's a couple ways to answer this question. One of the best ways to understand how dinosaurs behaved is by studying their closest relatives.
Yep, studying living animals, because unfortunately, I personally don't have a time machine, so I can't go back and look at dinosaurs and see them talking to each other. And
Not that we don't want one.
No, I'd love one. And we unfortunately can't really look at the skeletons and see all of the ways the dinosaurs talk to each other, because like a bird, for example, uses a complex structure inside of its throat that's similar to what we use that allows us to speak. And that complex structure, it lets them sing. But that's not made of bone. So we don't have fossils of it. So how can you tell?
But we do know that birds sing. And we know that birds are living dinosaurs. So we know that birds are communicating by making calls. And the other closest living relatives of dinosaurs are crocodiles and alligators. And crocodiles and alligators also use different kinds of like rumbling, throaty roars and calls to talk to each other.
You don't think of them as talking to each other, but the babies call to their moms when they're in danger. Guys call to girls when it's the mating season, things like that.
And we can actually play some of those sounds right now.
That's weird.
Yeah, like it sounds to me like Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Really weird.
So, one of the other things that we have is a little bit of stuff preserved in some kinds of dinosaurs that show that they could have made really interesting sounds, maybe. And so there's, for instance, a group of animals called the duck-billed dinosaurs that have these like long tubes. It looks like a band instrument strapped to their heads. And when they breathe, they could have had some air go into these really complicated tubes. And paleontologists have actually modeled those tubes using pipes. And they put air through it, and we think we can model the sound of a calling dinosaur. But dinosaurs also had pretty good vision. They had good ears, but they could see really well too. And so another way dinosaurs might have communicated is by what they looked like. We know that today birds use their feathers for communicating with each other to say, hey, I'm a male of your species and I'm looking for a female, or hey, I belong to your species. And so dinosaurs probably, we know they had feathers, and probably had colors that helped them communicate with each other, just like modern birds and even like some alligators and crocodiles. Why is a paleontologist called a paleontologist?
You love words, so you answer this question.
I love where words come from. And paleontology has a lot of weird words that come from weird places, including the word paleontology. So paleos, the first part of the word in paleontology, means old. And so the second part of that, ologist, gets thrown on the end of a lot of different kinds of scientists.
Like geologist or biologist.
And so ologist basically just means the study of, or someone who studies. And so paleontologist, that word means someone who studies old things. And that's not to be confused with an archaeologist, because archaeologist actually means the same thing. Archaeo means old, and ologist means study of. But archaeologists are a group of people that study artifacts. So they study things that are old, but not as old as fossils.
And they have to have been made by people. So a mummy is an example of an artifact, or the pyramids are gigantic artifacts. But an archaeologist would never study animal fossils.
So paleontologist, someone who studies old stuff. Really old stuff. All right, so have you collected flat teeth of animals? And this is actually kind of an interesting question because a lot of the animals we talked about yesterday, like Rahunavis, the relative of velociraptors, or Majungasaurus, which is a big kind of T-Rex looking animal, have really sharp teeth, big pointy teeth. And not all animals have pointy teeth because sometimes you need to eat plants.
Well, why don't you bring out an example of that right now? Now, the animals we showed yesterday that ate plants was Gasuchus, which was a crocodile. And its teeth were shaped like leaves, but they were still pretty pointy, and that suggests that these were good teeth for just sort of cutting through leaves and bringing them into its mouth. But not all animals that eat plants deal with it the same way.
And so here at the museum that we work in, we have a couple of skulls of some living animals.
Yeah.
And we have their teeth, and we know what they did with their teeth.
That is a big... Whose head is that?
This is the head of a horse.
Oh.
So this is a living, well, once a living horse, but you can still find a horse that has a skull like this today. And when we look at its teeth, you can see that they are very flat.
Yeah, they're big, wide and flat teeth. Why do you do that?
When we find big, flat teeth, that usually tells us that this animal is all about grinding instead of slicing. Because when you're eating plants, plants are actually pretty tough to get through. Like, it takes a lot of effort to do that. And so horses have these really flat teeth with lots of little ridges on them that help them really break down the salad that they're eating. And that's something that has evolved in all kinds of animals that eat plants. For instance, this is the skull of a now extinct giant beaver.
That is a big beaver.
It's a giant. I mean, look, it's here's the horse compared to this extinct Ice Age beaver. I mean, it's a big beaver.
Yeah, pretty much.
And beavers are rodents, which means their close relatives are things like mice. And when we look at the teeth of this beaver, though, we can see it has teeth that are also very flat and very broad that are a lot like the teeth of that horse. And so it tells us this beaver likes to eat food that's a lot more like what the horse likes to eat than what something like Majungasaurus might like to eat, because it's not slicing through stuff. So I've found horse teeth and rodent teeth in sites in Kenya, which are about 5 million years old, because we find the fossil relatives of zebras and giraffes and elephants and all these other big plant-eating animals that were living in Africa.
Must be lots of grass to chew on.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, we have pretty flat teeth, too.
I was going to say, when I eat a lettuce or a salad or something, I usually am using the teeth in the back to really just grind that down as far as I can. So I don't just swallow an entire leaf, because that's gross. If
we didn't like paying attention to what we do every day, then looking at our teeth, we would be able to say, oh yeah, we should be able to eat plants. All right, so our next question is, how long have you been a paleontologist?
Well, I'm 27 years old right now. And I started loving dinosaurs and fossils when I was 2. So I'm going to say 27 minus 2, 25 years. Right from the beginning.
Yep, and as long as I could look at a book before I could read, I was interested in fossils. And anyone can be a paleontologist. If you remember, the word paleontologist is someone who studies old stuff. So as long as you are studying old things, it means that you are a paleontologist.
Absolutely. Now, it takes many, many years to get to the point where you're paid to be a paleontologist, where it's your whole job. Yeah, exactly. And it took us a long, long time to get to the point where, as graduate students, we do get paid to do the work that we do.
So I've been working on getting at the job of being a paleontologist basically since college.
Yeah.
Because in college, you have to decide, that's what happens after high school. And in college, you have to decide kind of what your interests are, what field you want to go into. And so some people choose to go into education, like your teachers. Some people go into medicine, like doctors. Yeah. And for me, I decided to go into geology, which is the study of rocks, and paleontology fits inside geology. It's a part of being a geologist. And I also studied anthropology, which is the study of humans and human evolution. And so after college, I then went to graduate school here at Stony Brook, which is in New York. And here, I've been studying for 5 years so far to become a full, all-the-time paleontologist. All right, and so one of the questions that was asked during class yesterday was Kyle brought up a rock that he'd found and asked us if it was a fossil, and if so, what kind of fossil it was. And so Miss Bug took some pictures of it and sent it to us so we could get a closer look at what was going on in that rock.
Because we like to be really careful as scientists. When someone asks us, what is this fossil, we want to be absolutely sure we have a good answer before we try and figure that out.
And one hypothesis had been that that rock was a snake vertebrae, or that there was a fossil of a snake vertebra in that rock. And so we got a closer look at it, and we think that it's actually a fossilized piece of coral. So it's these small, they're tiny, tiny animals that live along reefs in the shallow ocean, and they like to kind of stick together and form these big colonies. So if you get a chance to look at Kyle's fossil, you'll see there's lots of little, they look like little cells almost.
Little holes in the
little holes. And in those, there would have been a little living coral. And so we don't quite know how old the site is where Kyle found that, so that's something to look into, and maybe ask a natural history museum what age it is, and then maybe what kind of coral it is. And we wanted to actually show, because one hypothesis was that it was a snake vertebrae.
Which is an interesting guess, because a snake vertebra, which I'll show you one right now, does have a big round surface on the back, and that's something that was present in the piece of coral that Kyle showed us. This is a snake vertebra. So this is one of the backbones of an ancient snake, again from the age of dinosaurs in Madagascar. It may not look like much, but this is actually from a snake that was about as long as a minivan. So a really, really big snake.
It's like a boa constrictor.
This is one backbone, and the snake may have had as many as 200 or 250 backbones in its entire body. And the reason we don't think that the fossil that Kyle showed us is a snake vertebra is because it does have that big round surface there, but to be a snake vertebra you have to have all this complicated kind of thing, all these complicated things sticking off the back. Because snakes only have their backbones. They have no legs, they have no arms, and so their backbones need to be really complicated to fit together and make all the motions that snakes are capable of possible. And the name of this snake is Madsoya. So if anyone asks you about something terrifying from the age of dinosaurs that wasn't a dinosaur, Madsoya the snake is a good example.
Terrifying. The anaconda of the age of dinosaurs. Yep. And then finally, what is the latest fossil that you have found? And I know that you, Adam, found some really interesting stuff, but you weren't in the field when you were finding it.
Yeah. No, I found the stuff I was working on in the museum we have here. So again, it was fossils from the age of dinosaurs in Madagascar, so 70 million years old on this island, Madagascar. But I was here in New York when I found the fossils because they were in a drawer. Someone had put this skeleton of another crocodile species, one we didn't show you. And part of the reason we didn't show you it is because, well, we don't have a really nice model of the skull yet because it doesn't have a name yet.
It's still in bits and pieces.
Yeah, it's so new that it doesn't yet have a name. So you're one of the first people in the world to hear about this. It's pretty cool. But he looks very different from both of the skulls we showed you. He's kind of like Majungasuchus in that his head is flat and relatively low. It looks like it's an animal that would have done really well living in the water. But unlike Majungasuchus, which you might remember as the toilet lid croc, who has this really wide nose, this new animal has a super narrow snout. Very, very, very thin, like a...
I think of like a dolphin almost,
yeah,
or something like that, like a long, skinny snout.
Yeah, it looks like something it looks like he'd be really good for grabbing just little things in the water. So we wonder if he might have been good for grabbing fish. But I found a skeleton of him in a drawer, and well, now he's on his way to getting a name. He doesn't have one yet, though.
Hopefully that answers some of the questions you have, and
I hope so too.
And if you have more, please let us know, because we love to answer any questions you have about life in the past. So, Bugville, with that, my name's Matt.
I'm Adam.
And thanks for your questions, and keep on digging.